Hello there. So this is our third FRQ prep, 3 of 4. And again, the goal here is trying to fit all the pieces together. So this is great practice for you as we get to the end of our semester. Assume the US economy is operating at full employment. So here, out of recession, expansion, and long run, we're in the long run. The government has a balanced budget. That means they're bringing in as much money as they're spending. Drop in consumer confidence, though, reduces consumption spending, causing the economy to enter a recession. And it says, using a correctly labeled graph of the short run Phillips curve, show the effect of the decrease in consumption spending, label A and then B, and then we'll go from there. So part A says, do a little Phillips curve, put a little Phillips curve in here, unemployment percent, inflation percent. Like I said in the last video, I really like the LRPC because it allows you to tell you whether the economy is in expansion, recession, or long run. And so I'm going to put it on there. Again, you're not going to get points off for that. So it's put it in there. The initial is A, and then it says that we lost consumption spending, so we entered a recession. So a recession is B. Okay. Then it says B. What's the impact of the recession on the federal budget? Now, they were in a balanced budget, and now it's saying, what's the impact? Well, this requires you to remember that there are things in fiscal policy called discretionary, where the government decides to take action. That hasn't happened. But there are also things like automatic stabilizers. And that's things like the income tax code, where as people's income falls, they pay less in taxes. And things like unemployment benefits, food aid, other kinds of assistant transfers and things like that, that increase government spending at the same time that taxes are falling. So the budget, right, maybe it's better to say budget enters, right? We'll answer their question directly. Then a budget enters a deficit. And then we need to explain. So we say, because automatic stabilizers, right? That's the name for those things, increase government spending and decrease tax revenue. That's probably the easiest way to explain why that process happens, right? Then it says C, assume that current GDP falls short of full employment by 500 and MPC is 0.8. Calculate the minimum increase in government spending that could bring about the full employment. So this one is going to require you to remember from Unit 7, the spending multiplier. So the spending multiplier, if you don't remember, is equal to 1 over the MPS. And then we know that MPS plus MPC equals 1. So this is 1 over 0.2, so that's 5. And then it's basically saying, our gap, what did we say, is 500. So we're trying to close a gap of 500. So therefore, the spending multiplier times a change in government spending is going to yield 500, right? The goal is to get us to 500. So 5 times a positive 100 equals that. And so that is our correct answer, right? That's our positive 100. Then it says C2. Assume instead the government decides to cut taxes. Will the tax cut have to be larger or smaller than the change in spending? And so this is basically saying, and explain, is saying, like, if instead of using spending to fix this problem, would the number that we end up with out of tax change, would that be bigger than 100 or smaller than 100? And based on our knowledge of the tax multiplier being 4, because we've got, if the spending multiplier equals 5, we can therefore say the tax multiplier equals 4. Technically it's -4, but who cares at this point? So we would say tax multiplier 4 times the change in tax has to still equal 500. So that means the change in tax would have to be a reduction of 125. And so at this point, right, you can kind of just say it has to be the change in taxes has to be greater than the change in government spending, because, and this is in fact, the answer could just be this, because the spending multiplier is larger than the tax multiplier. And if you had written all that stuff out, you would absolutely get full credit, because you're demonstrating that taxes don't have that initial effect on GDP. Then it says, using a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market. I used all of the space. On the AP exam, you have pages and pages of space, so I screwed this up. Show the impact of the increased spending on the interest rate in the economy. So that shouldn't be too bad, but we're going to have to shoehorn it in down here at the bottom of the page if you're like me and you took up too much space. So quantity of loanable funds, I sub R, remember that R is really important. Demand for loanable funds, supply of loanable funds. Now, there's two ways that we can model this, right? The government is going to spend more money, and so they're going to be borrowing that money. And remember that that's a shifter in loanable funds. They're increasing their borrowing. And so you can either model it as a decrease in supply, or you can model it as an increase in demand. Your choice, right? I'll let you pick. I'm going to draw demand increasing just because I think it's more makes more sense to me. The total amount of borrowing goes up, and the real interest rate goes up. And that's actually what this question is asking, right? It says, how will it affect the real interest rate in the economy? So we absolutely need to have that arrow because that tells us that the real interest rate went up. And then the second part, for part E, if the real interest rate changed, right, how does it affect the growth rate of the US economy? And we'd say it decreases it because if I sub R goes up, we'd say therefore investment decreases, therefore less productivity growth, right? So you kind of have to make some kind of connection between the investment spending and that long run economic growth rate. And you can do it by saying like capital, there's another phrase that sometimes students use that's I think is very quick and easy. You can say capital formation slows, right? And if capital formation is slowing down, literally we're not forming as much new machinery, tools, factories, that's what capital is, then that's going to slow down our growth rate. So you kind of use that as your explanation as well. You could say interest rate goes up, investment spending down, capital formation slows, therefore long-run growth rate slows. All right, this is an outstanding question. I'm probably going to put it on the test. See you next time.